Yep, see you later. Okay, so I wanted to take some time and talk about network attacks and a few mitigation techniques to help protect against network attacks. This is in Module 16 of the Introduction to Networks course. So there are generally 4 different types of threats. There's information theft. That's where a threat actor gains access to a network or to a system in order to steal things like research information, proprietary information, product information. They can also steal employee information and customer data, which it's pretty much done for the purpose of selling that information, or sometimes it's used in other ways in order to, but basically the bottom line is it's not destroyed. It's done for the purpose of stealing the information to either sell or to use in some way. Identity theft is actually another form of information theft. That's done for the purpose of specifically taking over a particular person's identity. If you can successfully take over someone's identity, you could get loans in their name and purchase vehicles or other products in that person's name, and then the threat actor never has to pay for it because the person whose identity they stole is on the hook for that. And that usually takes a lot of legal hoops for anybody who's a victim of that. Has to go through a lot of legalities and working with lawyers in order to get all that cleared off of their name. So it's really damaging to the person, to the victim in that case. Data loss and manipulation, that's similar to information theft really, but it's done for the purpose of destroying the information. A lot of times that's done using a virus or some other program will actually wipe a hard drive clean, for instance. Sometimes it can be done for the purpose of changing information rather than actually destroying it. This is done for the purpose of either changing or destroying data to benefit the threat actor or whoever hired the threat actor. And the 4th type would be disruption of service. And that's where basically a network is overloaded or a device is overloaded to the point where it's effectively offline. It makes the service inaccessible to users. A vulnerability is a weakness in a network or a device on the network. There's 3 different types, basically. One is a technological vulnerability. Think of that, anyone who uses like a protocol or weaknesses in a protocol, such as HTTP or FTP, that would be considered a protocol weakness and that's a technological vulnerability. Your operating system, an operating system that has not had its security updates kept up to date, that would be considered a technological vulnerability. Network equipment in general, any intermediary devices such as routers, switches, and firewalls, if any of those are compromised, that would be called a technological vulnerability. Configuration vulnerability, that involves misconfigurations, either in equipment or in internet services. This could also be another example of a configuration vulnerability would be unsecured user accounts. For instance, login information is often sent over a network. If it's not secured properly, it can be exposed to a threat actor. Bad passwords, that's another example of a configuration vulnerability. And network equipment, that's using default settings. So think about your Wi-Fi routers at home. You get those, you plug them in. They usually come with a like a password, a username and password of admin or admin password or something like that. And they'll usually come in with the with an IP address range of a private IP address range of 192.168.1.1. Those are default settings. Those are configuration vulnerabilities as well. The last one is security policy vulnerabilities. And that's where you start to run into examples where in a company, if you have a networking staff, a networking department that is understaffed and they don't have enough people in place to properly maintain the network, that would be a security policy vulnerability. Companies that don't have any plans in place for like disaster recovery, if they don't have a security policy in place, those would be security policy vulnerabilities. What's another good example? If this kind of goes hand in hand with a company that doesn't have a written security policy, but if there are unauthorized changes done to a network by just, maybe an employee, even a manager who makes a change to the topology of a network, they change out a machine on the network, any unauthorized changes like that, that would also be security policy vulnerability. Physical security is sometimes overlooked. A lot of people think of, when they think of network security, they think of, access to the network. But physical security really can be just as important. Physical security, like a hardware threat. Think about a disgruntled employee and a sledgehammer. That would be a hardware threat, wouldn't it? I mean, if somebody took a sledgehammer to the company server or the main router, that's a physical, that's an unsecured physical location example. Most companies have their networking equipment in a secure location. Environmental threats is another example of physical security. If it's a server room, even if your equipment is all locked up properly, if the server room doesn't have an air conditioner and it's Texas and it's July, you could end up with some damaged equipment, maybe a server that goes down because it overheats. And likewise, if it gets too damp, if you have humidity issues, electricity and water, they don't play well together. Speaking of electricity, it's another threat. Most companies, they will have their important equipment plugged into surge suppressed battery backup supplies. But if there's any equipment that is not plugged into a surge protector and a battery backup, that would be considered a electrical threat. A lightning strike nearby could cause a power surge and take out a whole bunch of networking equipment in that way. And perhaps the most overlooked in my experience is simply maintenance threats. This could be poor handling and storage, and what I've seen a lot in the real world is unclean environment. In particular, you'll see in a lot of retail stores that don't have a server room per se. They'll have switches underneath the counters, or they'll have switches and routers just on a back shelf. They'll get piled under with desks. They'll have other things stored on top of them. Those would be examples of maintenance threats where it's just, the equipment is not properly being maintained, no one's making sure that there's proper airflow and that the vents aren't covered with dust and things like that. Well, malware is really an umbrella term that refers to any software that's bad. Think viruses, worms, Trojans, spyware, things like that, all fall under malware. So viruses and worms, they reproduce by infecting other files and programs. The main difference between a virus and a worm is that worms can easily travel across the network, whereas viruses typically need the interaction of a user in order to spread from one computer to another. Trojans, they self-replicate by when executed by a user, and they're designed to mimic a legitimate program. So the most effective way to mitigate against worms in particular, but really malware in general, is to make sure that your software is completely up to date. Make sure that all your security updates in particular are done in a timely manner. Another strategy to help mitigate malware attacks is to educate your users. Don't click on any link in an email unless you know what it is and you're expecting it. Things like that. So network attacks can be classified into three major categories. Reconnaissance attacks, the purpose of those is to map out a network. Think of tools just like ping and NSLOOKUP. Those can be used to map out a network, and there's a lot of apps that you can get online that will utilize that same technology and automatically kind of probe a network and give you a list of IP addresses and devices on a network. Access attacks really refers to any type of attack where a threat actor is trying to gain information in order to access a network. Think obtaining passwords using brute force or using a Trojan or installing a packet sniffer on a line. There's other ways that threat actors can also can gain access information. They use port redirection. Port redirection, think of this, if a threat actor is able to connect to a compromised host using SSH, and if that compromised host is trusted by another host on the network, then the threat actor can access that other host through the host that he or she has gained access to. So threat actor connects to host A, say using SSH. And if host B is trusted by host A, then the threat actor can telnet into host B. Another way that threat actors can gain access information is using a man-in-the-middle attack. And this is basically a threat actor positioning themselves between two legitimate entities and reading traffic. This is I don't want to say it's common, but this is the reason why you should never, ever access banking information if you're on a public Wi-Fi. This is very easy to set up on a Wi-Fi system. So if you're ever at Starbucks or something, and you're on their public Wi-Fi, surfing online, that's great, but don't check your banking statements or your 401k or anything like that while you're on a public Wi-Fi. So let's see. Oh, I went. Denial of service is the other one. We kind of covered this a little bit. This is basically the same idea as disruption of service. Denial of service, basically, the ultimate goal is to overwhelm a network or device to the point where it becomes inaccessible. Ping flooding is an example that comes to mind. But anytime that you have a device or multiple devices accessing a single device on a network, you can set it to overwhelm that device, and that's the ultimate goal of a denial of service is to overwhelm a device and ultimately a network. So all these external attacks, they can be mitigated by using a firewall. It's actually one of the most effective countermeasures against any external attack. They can help to filter out unwanted traffic while permitting good traffic, if you will, the wanted traffic in order to allow it into your network. Most organizations use a defense in-depth approach, which is a fancy way of saying they use a lot of different strategies together to protect against multiple threats. It's also known as a layered approach. So, several security devices and services are implemented to protect, an organization's users and assets, such as a VPN, a firewall, IPS, the ESA, which is an email service, protects against email traffic. WSA protects against unwanted web traffic. A AAA server, which is authentication server. So all those things together are known as a defense in depth or a layered approach. So backups are another important aspect or mitigation strategy against threats. And you would think, well, backups, don't really protect against threats. Well, if a threat is successful, if you have a good backup, you have a better chance of recovering, quickly. So, backup systems are an important strategical part of mitigation strategy. Backup systems, they must be protected in the same way, and they should be stored in a separate offsite location just to protect against physical risks. For instance, if the building burns down, takes out a net, obviously your network's going to be down if your building goes down, if your building goes up in flames. But if you have a good backup, you'll at least be able to rebuild from that. I think I mentioned authentication servers before. It uses AAA for authentication, authorization, and accounting. This basically controls who has access, what each user is allowed to do, and also tracks user actions throughout the network. And endpoint security, my favorite. The most challenging of jobs, probably involving security at least. It involves working with users, many of whom are not technologically savvy. It involves training and education of users, telling them over and over again, don't click on those and a link from someone you don't know, or even if it's somebody you do know, but you're not expecting it. Don't click on that Facebook link while you're at work. Companies need to have network policies in place in order for endpoint security to really be effective. And users have got to be educated on a constant basis. So that pretty much covers network attacks and mitigation. And if you have any questions, feel free to leave comments, or you can email me or contact me in the normal methods. You have a good day.